Warning: this episode contains crimes against children. Listener discretion is advised. On March 13, 1996, the local police office in Dunblane, Scotland, received a frantic phone call from Ronald Taylor, the headmaster of nearby Dunblane Primary School. Ronald had been alerted by assistant headmistress Agnes Olsen to the possibility of a gunman on school premises. Screams were heard from the gymnasium, and Agnes had seen what she believed to be spent bullet cartridges on the ground. Ronald had heard the loud noises, but had written these off as construction work the school had been requiring. He thought that perhaps someone had organised this work and simply forgotten to inform him. He was no longer so sure. Ronald made his way apprehensively to the gymnasium. During his journey, it was made apparent no construction work was taking place. Upon entering, Mr. Taylor witnessed the devastating scene of limp, infantile bodies strewn across the floor. An adult male lay dead amongst the carnage. He did not belong in the school. I'm Jess, and this is Skinwalker. Dunblane is a small country town with a population of around 9,000 people on the outskirts of the council district of Stirling, approximately 25 miles from Scotland's largest city, Glasgow. It sits amongst rolling hills in Scotland's central belt, and its quiet way of life and beautiful scenery have always proven popular with tourists and locals alike. Dunblane Primary School is the local area's focal point for early education, providing educational services for, at the time, 640 pupils. The early school system in Scotland runs from Primary 1 to Primary 7. Primary 1 is a child's first year at school, which they will typically start at the age of 5. They then leave when they are either 11 or 12. After this, Scottish children move on to high school. Ronald Taylor was exceptionally proud of his role as head teacher at Dunblane Primary School. He was not only in a picturesque part of the world, but he was also a source of support for these children on their educational journey. This role also brought substantial respect within the Dunblane community. Ronald Taylor described the morning of March 13, 1996. It was a beautiful morning, very bright, frosty, the snowdrops were out. This was typical Scottish weather for this time. It would lead anyone to believe that this day would be no different from any other successful day he had presided over as head teacher. The parents dropped their children off at the school gates before 9 AM. Many watched on as their children ran to class, then left as the children went inside, heading on with their working day. Teacher Gwen Mayer took her class of 29 Primary 1 pupils, all aged between 5 and 6 years old, for their first lesson of the day, physical education. At around 9:30 AM, the children were running wildly around the rectangular hall, having fun and playing various games. In the distance, a middle-aged man in an oversized anorak stood cutting telephone wires at the foot of a telegraph pole at the edge of the school's property. He walked to his car and retrieved several guns and holstered them on his side. He then walked coolly across the school car park and playground before entering the main school building by the northwest side door. He entered and fired 2 bullets into the stage of an adjacent assembly hall, then entered the gym hall through the main entrance. He immediately raised a gun and opened fire on everyone stood inside. A physical education teacher, Eileen Harold, and a teaching assistant, Mary Blake, were wounded almost immediately. Both crawled to shelter within a cupboard inside the gym. They attempted to bring with them as many children as possible. As they hid in the closet, they could hear constant gunshots outside. They knew that they were still children and their teacher, Gwen Mayer, trapped in the gym hall. The shooting was relentless. A teacher and older student attempted to peer in through the door at one point to find out what was going on. They were immediately shot at and fled the scene. The assailant then left the gym. As he progressed onwards, he continued firing. This time, he aimed towards the library cloakroom and then into a mobile classroom. The teacher in this classroom screamed at the children to get down on the floor, which they immediately did. The shooter did not enter. Bullets came so close to the children cowering within that bullet holes were later found in the backrests of the chairs in the class. The shooter made his way back to the gym hall, where he dropped the gun he had been using and armed another one of the 4 legally owned guns that the man had on him. These were 2 9mm Browning pistols and 2 Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolvers. This time, he aimed one of his pistols upwards into his own mouth and pulled the trigger. His exanimate body dropped to the floor. By the time Ronald Taylor reached the gym hall, the man was dead. His body was still twitching. The first ambulance arrived at the school at 9:57 a.m, coming as a result of Ronald Taylor's call at 9:43 a.m. It made numerous transfer trips after that, transporting the wounded to the Stirling Royal Infirmary and performing on-site triage to get the patients seen in the safest possible order. The police had arrived before the ambulance, taking only 7 minutes from the end of Ronald Taylor's call to reach the scene. However, given the killer had committed suicide, their role was primarily to secure the scene, prevent any secondary attacks, document any evidence, and identify victims. The entire staff made multiple trips into the harrowing scene before them, doing their best to help the police identify the dead and assist the wounded. Ronald Taylor's actions, alongside those of his colleagues in this respect, were later described as far beyond what might reasonably have been expected of them by Lord Cullen. Over the day, the police and the ambulance service's harrowing work and investigations showed that in less than 5 minutes, the gunman had left 15 children and their teacher Gwen Mayer dead. A further child then died en route to the hospital. A further 15 people were also wounded during the attack. Police were quick to identify the 17th dead body. The gunman was a local man and former scout leader, Thomas Hamilton. Hamilton's macabre handiwork quickly became national news. Thomas Watt Hamilton was born in Glasgow on May 10, 1952. His mother Agnes had been born out of wedlock 21 years previously in 1931. At this time, an illegitimate child may have been seen as a shame to the family, so it is not incredibly surprising that her mother had given her away to James and Catherine Hamilton. For 19 years, Agnes stayed with her adopted parents at their Glasgow home until she met and fell in love with a local bus driver, Thomas Watt, then aged 21. Thomas and Agnes married in Bridgeton Church, Glasgow, on December 1950, and within 2 years the couple had a son, also called Thomas. When the little boy was just 18 months old, his father fell in love with a bus conductress, Margaret McGill, and turned his back on his son and wife. A distraught Agnes and the baby moved back into the home of her adopted parents in 1954. Her adopted parents did all they could to help, and in the spring of 1956, they took the unusual step of adopting the young Hamilton when he was aged 4. This now meant that Thomas's mother Agnes was now legally his older sister. Thomas Hamilton grew up firmly in the belief that his natural mother was, in fact, his sister. In 1985, when Agnes moved into a house of her own, Hamilton elected to remain with his adoptive parents. With his adoptive parents, he moved into 7 Kent Road in Stirling, where he lived until his suicide on March 13, 1996. In the book Dunblane Unburied, Sandra Utley states, Thomas had always been an outsider. At school, he was either ignored or bullied and never had any meaningful friendships. He was considered a mummy's boy and was ostracised for not being one of the lads. Reports from his childhood did, however, suggest that Hamilton was at least a hard-working and dedicated pupil who excelled at technical drawing and maths. Understanding the mechanics of things appealed to Hamilton, whether it was the design of a house drawn to scale, a wooden joist for a cupboard, or the workings of a gun. Hamilton, by now a young adult, opened a store named Woodcraft at 49 Cowan Street, Stirling, in 1972. He earned his living by selling DIY goods, general handyman services, and eventually the sale of fitted kitchens. He was also a keen amateur photographer, which he occasionally earned some money from. In 1985, Woodcraft failed, and from that point on, Hamilton primarily lived on state benefits and occasional photography and camera repair earnings for 8 years until November 1993. The massacre at Dunblane Primary School was not the first time Hamilton exhibited signs of the danger which lurked inside him. Issues had been raised into Hamilton's conduct as early as the 1970s. During this period, Hamilton began working with private youth clubs. He started out as an assistant leader with one of the Stirling branches of the Scout Association, a position which came with extensive access to children in semi-supervised and unsupervised settings. Due to his zeal, he was then elected to a role as Scout leader with a newly revived Scout branch, which was also within Stirling. His new role only served to increase his ability to spend unsupervised time around children. His appointment came to an end, however, due to events at 2 separate weekend camping trips in Aviemore in 1974. During the first weekend, Hamilton claimed he had booked a hostel for the boys in Aviemore, but he had not. Along with the 8 boys under his care, he had slept in the back of the van. Hamilton later claimed that he had tried to book a hostel, however, when he arrived the hostel was full. This story was accepted by the Scout leadership as being within the realms of possibility, given that booking accommodation was slightly more laissez-faire within the 1970s. Hamilton was nonetheless sharply rebuked and informed no such situations were to arise again. Failing to take heed of their words, a similar issue quickly arose again on Hamilton's second Scout venture. Hamilton would likely have gotten away with this unconventional sleeping arrangement had it not been for the van freezing over. As a result of the cold conditions, the children reported their stressful experience to their parents once they had returned home. The collective impact of these 2 events led to the revocation of his Scout warrant. There were some further unaddressed concerns raised over his, quote, unstable and possibly improper behaviour following a Scout camp. Hamilton, showing complete disregard for the findings, kept a hold of the physical copy of his leadership warrant for many months after his dismissal, despite repeated requests for its return. This panel was not the end of Hamilton's dealings with the Scouts. Mr. Brian Fairgrieve, a retired surgeon and former Scouting County Commissioner for Stirling, wrote to the Scottish Scout headquarters to give them his views about Thomas Hamilton. In a letter dated June 29, 1974, he wrote, quote, while unable to provide concrete evidence against this man, I feel that too many incidents relate to him such that I am far from happy about his having any association with Scouts. He has displayed irresponsible acts on outdoor activities by taking young favourite Scouts for weekends during the winter and sleeping in his van. the excuse for these outings being hill walking expeditions. The lack of precautions for such outdoor activities displays either irresponsibility or an ulterior motive for sleeping with the boys. His personality displays evidence of a persecution complex coupled with rather grandiose delusions of his own abilities. As a doctor, and with my clinical acumen only, I am suspicious of his moral intentions towards boys. Mr. Dukers, the district commissioner, also submitted a form to Scout headquarters to the effect that Thomas Hamilton was not considered to be a suitable applicant due to his immaturity and irresponsibility. This resulted in his name being entered on the Scouts' blacklist, which is intended to ensure that unsuitable applicants are denied any appointment within the Scout Association. Such a record is also consulted on occasions when an outside inquiry is made as to whether a former Scout leader has provided satisfactory service in a previous role. In the case of Thomas Hamilton, it was to prove effective in preventing him in his attempt to later become a Scout leader in Clackmannanshire. Nonetheless, these complaints mostly focused on Hamilton's suitability for leadership, rather than the inherent sexual nature of his actions. Over time, however, complaints began to filter in which did allege a sexual aspect to Hamilton's peculiarity. Despite the revocation of his Scouts warrant, an undeterred Hamilton started to set up his own private boys' clubs. He created 15 in total over the period of 1981 to 1996. All of these clubs were primarily aimed at boys between the ages of 7 and 11, and activities were typically football with some gymnastics. The clubs then held summer camps on Inchmore Island at Loch Lomond. Up to 13 boys would join Hamilton for a week or 2 weeks at a time, typically with no further adult supervision. George Robertson, then a local Member of Parliament and Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, had taken his son Malcolm to one of Hamilton's camps. He stated, "I didn't like what I saw. There were lots of little boys there, all stripped to the waist, and Hamilton and his cohorts all swaggering around. It was like something out of the Hitler Youth. I took Malcolm away." Instead of accepting Mr. Robertson's decision, Hamilton went to the MP's home and demanded to know if, by his actions, Mr. Robertson was making accusations against him. Reflecting on the experience, the MP used the word on everyone's lips in Dunblane. He had no proof against Hamilton, he was just, quote, uneasy. One local woman, Doreen Hager, had a child visit one of Hamilton's camps. Her son had signed up to go for 2 weeks to Hamilton's summer camp. Within 1 week, he was making repeated phone calls, desperately asking to return home. Donna stated that her son had told her that Hamilton had even thrown him out of the boat and into the loch. Hamilton had also confiscated the boys' clothes and allegedly demanded that the entire group only wear swimming trunks when out of their tents. Upon going to the campsite to collect her son, she decided to stay on ostensibly to help out, but more likely to scope out the conditions. Doreen noticed that the camp had none of the facilities that Hamilton had promised. She left stating she was going to complain to the police. When the police interviewed her son, he revealed to them that Hamilton had the boys rub suntan lotion on him, a complaint that was on record as having been made previously. Doreen alleges that an incident then occurred sometime after she had been interviewed by Inspector Keenan in January 1989 in connection with her complaint concerning Thomas Hamilton. Doreen said that she and her friend Janet Riley had been coming back from the shops and had picked up her daughter Vicky after she had been dropped off the school bus in the main street. They were just getting to her gate when a light-coloured transit van driven by Thomas Hamilton slammed up at the pavement. She then went on to say, quote, "He rolled the window down and he said, 'I hear you have been making statements about me to Keenan.' I said, 'That's right. I just told him about the state of the camp, how you treated the kids, and my own personal opinion of you.' And at that, he leaned forward. His face was all puffy. He leant forward and I thought he was going to start the engine up, and the next thing I heard was a click of metal hitting the glass. I looked down and there was a bit of metal there. It didn't register with me right away, and I just looked at him and he said, 'My friends don't like it.' I looked again, and that is when I realised that it was a barrel, and I said, 'Don't point that fucking thing at me. I will ram it down your throat.' He just got really bulging and never said a word. Off he went." This incident was followed up by the police. However, after cross-examination, the stories did not match up between Doreen and Janet. As such, no charges were brought. Doreen, however, was not finished with Hamilton. On the evening of May 16, 1989, Thomas Hamilton was at the Linlithgow Academy gym hall. As Hamilton left the premises, he was confronted by Doreen, who emptied the contents of 2 buckets over him. The contents were a concoction consisting of suntan oil, liquid manure, flour, fish manure, vinegar, and wallpaper paste. Hamilton stood, saturated by the substance. He required assistance to clean himself, and there was a significant amount of waste product on the ground surrounding him. The police were called to the school by the janitor to investigate a potential assault. Hamilton was interviewed by the police but declined to press charges against Doreen. It is alleged that as the confrontation took place, Doreen screamed at the sodden and sullen Hamilton, quote, "I'm sorry I couldn't get a wee boy to rub it in." It is also alleged that Doreen kicked Hamilton as the attack occurred. As of the events of March 13, 1996, Hamilton had never received a conviction for sexual offences. He had, however, been cautioned by police 18 months before the Dunblane Massacre after being caught in a compromising position with a young male on Edinburgh's Calton Hill. Unfortunately, the police did not investigate the age of the young attendant male in Hamilton's car that evening. Secretly, Hamilton was under investigation from the Scottish Police over several open reports of sexual misconduct, although the exact extent of these investigations have never been publicly revealed. His image was also significantly tarnished. Men who had served under Hamilton as young boys in his clubs regularly referred to him both publicly and privately as Mr. Creepy. This occurred even to Hamilton's face. This was both a reflection on his conduct around certain boys within the club and his general appearance. With his hair balding, thick-rimmed glasses, and known for always wearing an anorak, it is not unfair to say that Thomas looked significantly older than his 43 years of age. Hamilton had attempted to join a gun club in the months before the murders, but he was refused membership after members who knew of him stated they should have nothing to do with the man. Allied to this, neighbours who had the misfortune of looking in the windows of 7 Kent Road had reported pictures hanging on the walls of young boys in swimwear. While these images were not blatantly pornographic, residents questioned why any man would decorate his walls with these images. There was also no effort at concealment. The pictures of bare-chested boys on his walls could be seen by anyone who was looking in his window. A female neighbour during a visit to the house was even shown his collection of videos of boys running around near naked and said that Hamilton acted as if they were the most natural thing in the world for a youth leader to film. Cullen, one of the members of Hamilton's scout troop, remembers going to the club as a child. He had no direct experience of abuse, but did note there were some boys he was very familiar with. his favourites if you like, who we would call the teacher's pet. They would go off on camps with him and seemed to be sworn to secrecy when they got back. The camps themselves were held on an island in Loch Lomond. Parents have told how boys had to hand in their clothes and were dressed in baggy swimming trunks. After several reports to police regarding inappropriate behaviour and questions regarding the activities at his Loch Lomond camp, the police decided to investigate and performed a raid during an activities weekend in 1991. Despite the submitted report motioning grounds for the potential for up to 10 charges, no prosecutions ever followed. By this same time, photography shops in Stirling were refusing to develop Hamilton's pictures of boys at their Loch Lomond camp. They said they were obscene, but the police, on reviewing the film, said they were not obscene enough for a prosecution. Throughout the years, as his image crumbled around him and the public grew increasingly hostile, Hamilton's boys' clubs moved further and further outside of Dunblane. As a club closed, it would move 10 miles further to new and unsuspecting parents from villages and cities who had never had the misfortune of meeting or being made aware of Thomas Hamilton. Several conspiracy theories surround the alleged protection of Thomas Hamilton by police. One of the more prominent involves the relationship that Hamilton had with one senior police official through a Masonic club and a reported paedophile ring. These reports remain thoroughly unsubstantiated, but the repeated blocks encountered by ordinary police and their investigations and findings on Hamilton before the massacre at Dunblane Primary School remains troublesome to this day. After the killings, the police were forced into action. The police searched the house at 7 Kent Road almost immediately after the crime scene had been secured. They discovered that before Hamilton departed for the school, he had a total of 1,700 rounds of ammunition on hand. The police also found a telephone directory open at the page containing the telephone number of Dunblane Primary School. On the walls of the rear bedroom of the house, Hamilton had hung several targets with stickers of the type used at his gun club meetings. It was not disclosed what the targets sat on top of. No photographs were hanging on the walls of any of the rooms, but Hamilton had stored a total of 445 slides, 542 photographs, and 4,260 negatives, which were recovered during the search of the house. The majority of these showed bare-chested boys varyingly in swimming trunks or in some form of undress. There were a further 37 videotapes of boys at his camps. Somewhat more sinisterly, there was also a collection of boys' swimming trunks. It is unreported whether the police investigated to whom they belonged. A public inquiry was opened on March 21, 1996, with Lord Cullen appointed to preside over and submit his findings. Throughout the investigation, Lord Cullen heard from police officers who had been aware of Thomas Hamilton in the years leading up to the tragedy, as well as many people who had altercations with Hamilton. The report was published in September 1996. A picture was put together of Thomas Hamilton's character, whereby Lord Cullen stated that he did not have many friends and suffered from what he perceived to be a persecution complex. Further findings by the inquiry were that Hamilton endeavoured to be surrounded by young boys, acting only in a fashion which enhanced his ability to do so, and was abusive to parents who withdrew their sons from his clubs. Hamilton harboured a long-term grudge against both the Scouts and police for the unfair treatment he felt he had received. Opinions on Hamilton varied between all of those who were interviewed by the inquiry, but a common thread amongst the findings was that he was, at the very least, unusual. The report also found that in the last 6 months of Hamilton's life, his club's memberships had declined significantly. He believed this to concern his public image, and in turn, he had sent a large number of circular letters to deal with, in his words, the false and misleading gossip about him. He stated, erroneously or maliciously, within these letters, that he had not been kicked out or asked to leave by the Scouts, and that it was his own personal decision to leave. An examination of his finances as at the date of his death was also carried out by Chief Inspector Hughes. This showed that he had made heavy use of credit accounts to provide finance for his everyday living. At his death, he owed over £8,000 in credit cards, overdrafts and loans, and had no capital in a bank or building society. He had total overdraft owings of £3,500. He had made an application for a further loan in 1996, which had been refused. In terms of income, he did not earn any significant money from his daily work with cameras, and was in arrears with the payment of his council tax, a form of local taxation paid in Scotland to the local authority. Psychological examinations concluded that there was no sign of mental illness from Thomas Hamilton. There had been no significant changes in his behaviour or attitude that would be expected with the onset of mental illness. A post-mortem also showed no signs of intoxication from any substance. Both examiners stated they felt Hamilton suffered from a personality disorder of some kind, however, disagreed on how this disorder should be classified. Very few positives can ever come from the massacre of innocent children. However, Scotland's response to the tragedy was at least swift and unwavering, with the potential impact of guns on society taking precedence. With a loud public outcry, media support, and the exceptionally critical Cullen report, gun laws in the United Kingdom were tightened significantly. It is incredibly challenging to obtain a permit for a personal weapon within the UK unless it is a sporting rifle or shotgun intended for sporting purposes. Lawmakers passed a ban across the United Kingdom on the private ownership of all handguns and military-style weaponry. The country now has some of the most robust anti-handgun legislation in the world. Scotland even opted to bring in ownership conditions for air guns in the aftermath of Dunblane. The impact of the governmental response can be seen to this day. While there has been an increase in firearms offences, mass shootings and school shootings in many other comparable countries around the world, Scotland declared another decrease in all firearm offences in 2019, with offences at a 39-year low. Between the years of 2017 and 2018, only 41 of over 5 million Scots were injured either fatally or non-fatally by a firearm in the previous year. 6 firearms offences did take place within a school, although these figures included possession of firearms, brandishing a weapon as a threat, and did not discriminate between automatic and air-powered weapons, nor legally and illegally owned firearms. The scars of Dunblane permeate Scottish society. Firearms are looked at almost abhorrently, and the memory of the victims ensures that gun violence is almost entirely a gangland problem, as opposed to a day-to-day issue for society. At the time of the incident, Andy Murray, the now world-famous tennis star, was a student a few years above the children who were massacred. He has mentioned numerous times throughout his career the indelible mark which the event has left upon him and his psyche throughout his career. More personally, a memorial garden was created at the town's cemetery for the victims. In the same cemetery, most of those who were murdered are buried. The central feature of the garden is a fountain, designed by Maggie Howarth, in dedication to their young but poignant lives. The garden was officially dedicated at a ceremony on March 14, 1998. The garden features a fountain with a prominent plaque which displays the names of the innocent children and their courageous teacher, all of whom Hamilton killed. Victoria Elizabeth Clydesdale, Emma Elizabeth Crozier, Melissa Helen Curry, Charlotte Louise Dunn, Kevin Allen Hassel, Ross William Irvin, David Charles Kerr, Mary Isabel McBeef, Brett McKinnon, Abigail Joanne McLennan, Emily Morton, Sophie Jane Lockwood North, John Petrie, Joanna Caroline Ross, Hannah Louise Scott, Megan Turner, and teacher Gwen Mayer. There is one name deliberately omitted which will never be included in any memorial.